Oh, the weekend's in the book, and as you can imagine, there is a lot for us to talk about on Footy Talk. I'm Jack Heverin. Great to be with you. We'll get to one member of this panel very, very shortly. But Ryan Daniels, he is the Prince of Perth. Rhino, great to have you on Footy Talk.
Well, I'm the co-Prince of Perth. It's me and Harley Reid. We share duties. When he's away, I just look after the throne for him, and then I keep it clean, and then he comes back and I have to vacate, which is fair. He's the future king.
How come you're not on the front page of the West Australian every day?
Look, that's a great question. It's something I need to take up with my employers. There should be more me time. Harley's got the back page. Surely the front page should be mine, right?
I think so too. Now, the third member of our team today, he is a 200 gamer with the Bombers. He's an Ironman now. He's just doing Ironmans in his spare time for fun. But Rhino, I know you can see it on the screen here, but he's just come in with a spring in his step, David Zaharakis. A 200 gamer with the Bombers, but with finals now a very real possibility for Essendon, he can smell September cash. Good to see you,
Is it a possibility or is it a certainty? Because I think we're about to lock him in, aren't we?
I'd say not only top four. Not only finals. I reckon there's a top four chance coming our way. Let's be honest. It's we are absolutely flying. I'm up and about. The boys are playing well, and our next 3 weeks. I don't know if you've looked at our next 3 weeks. We could be top 2 after round 12. We have got North Melbourne, Richmond, and the Gold Coast.
Isn't it interesting how all of a sudden it's we again?
It is, yes. And when I'm a player, I wouldn't look too far ahead. But now as a fan, I can look ahead and go, those are 3 wins on the board for us.
Speaking of that finals money, I just overheard a conversation out the back. Zachar on the phone to his better half and said, yeah, we can book LA in October. Sure, we're going to be there for that.
We'll be good to go. Actually, you know what? Let's get business class. Let's do business class.
Oh, yes.
Well, why don't we start with the Bombers? They are the big story of the weekend, I guess, from a positive standpoint. Great win. They're third on the ladder. As you mentioned, Zachar, their next couple of weeks are really, really kind. And full credit to Brad Scott. I think, the players, there's some guys that are playing really good footy at the moment, but he is coaching his backside off this year, Brad Scott.
Yeah, and I remember when he came to the club, the boys were saying he was all about defence and effort. If you didn't give defence and effort, then you weren't going to play for the footy club. And you can tell players in there now who, I wouldn't say they didn't defend early on in their careers, but they certainly didn't show the effort that they're showing right now in defence. And that's been the most impressive thing for me. I don't want to name names and throw anyone out there, but I just know as a whole collective, as a footy club and a playing group, they are showing more defence and harder to score against in the last 5 weeks than we've ever been or we've been in the last couple of years. So credit to Scotty for bringing that out in his players. They're clearly playing for him and for the jumper in that regard. And then just the way we're moving the ball offensively, it's exciting again to watch. And I know a lot of fans are very excited.
Look, I was probably one, and I wasn't alone, that looked at the Bombers list the last probably 12 to 18 months and the moves they've made in the off-seasons and gone, geez, they're just sort of topping up with guys, middle-of-the-road guys who are not going to be superstars. Yep. And you look at their list and think it's Zach Merritt and then a bunch of just okay players. But that might actually be the way to go. To build a list, you either got to go right through the draft and get these high-end, top-end talents, which we've seen takes a really long time and isn't foolproof. Or you do the Essendon route and you go, right, let's get Todd Goldstein in because we need a ruckman. Let's get Jade Gresham because he's a really handy half forward. Let's go and get Dersma from Port Adelaide, who unfortunately injured, but was playing a really good role on the wing. So it's almost that, not the money side of Moneyball, but the whole, let's get a guy who can play this role and fill it. It's working because across the board, you've got a bunch of solid units. No one's really letting anybody down. They play together and they all play their role really, really well.
Well, you've hit it on the head there, but it is a risk. We did it a couple of years ago in that 2018 time. We obviously brought in Jake Stringer, Devon Smith, Adam Sard, who left a couple of years later, and Dylan Shield. And I would say that experiment of those 4 players didn't necessarily work for us. We weren't successful until, pretty much now that we're on that path. So it's worked for us initially with these players coming in. I mean, Todd Goldstein has been unbelievable for us. I know the midfielders just love roving to him. He's just a meat and 3 veg ruckman. I'll just tap it down to you and you do the work, and he helps out around the ground. And I like Jay Gresham up forward. I still think he's finding his feet up there, but I think Scotty's getting the best out of the side he's got at the moment. But it is a risk bringing in those players, that mid-tier, mid-career type players, because it didn't work initially for us a couple of years ago, but it definitely is now.
And Rhino, they've had some good wins, the Bombers, but this is the scalp they needed to have. There's a difference between wins and beating genuine top 4 contenders. And the Giants, I think, are one of the better teams in the comp. We'll get to them later. But that's a massive scalp for them, and that should give them a lot of confidence going forward too.
Yeah, and the way they did it too, they had to come back from being down. I mean, I stopped watching that game. I was like, this is going to go exactly how we expect it to go. Giants are just going to roll away with a 40-point win here. And then I sort of was tracking it on socials and went, okay, I need to turn the TV back on. But it was a great performance. Their percentage is a bit of a concern. You look at the ladder and go, that's weird. You don't normally see a team in third have a percentage under 100.
Yeah.
But you can only beat what's in front of you. And at the moment, they're getting the job done. My only question would be, and I know we've got to move on from Essendon, is this sort of list build that they've taken, is it good enough to get you to a spot where you're a finals team? Can it win a flag? That would be the one question I have, and we won't know until we see how it plays out. But what is the ceiling for a team that is built like this?
It's interesting because that percentage has only happened from one game. So Port, they lost by 70, and Sydney was only 5 goals. So that percentage has happened. We don't put teams away. I agree with you on that. We don't smash teams, but we're winning the games that are in front of us. That's all you can do. But I also do agree with the list. I think Nate Caddy's a big one as a youngster. He's a top 10 draft pick last year. I cannot wait if he plays this year. I'm not sure if Scotty's just keeping him in the reserves for maybe the year, but he's another one who I think is going to be a superstar that can come through.
Look how excited he is all of a sudden. It's we and us, and we've got young players that we haven't even seen yet. For all bookings, hit him up on Instagram, David Zaharakis. You may as well get in early for September because he's going to go very quick. Rhino, Fremantle on Friday night had to go through something that we won't understand. Let's be honest here. When you lose a teammate like that and you're asked to play within 24 to 48 hours of finding out, you could tell watching them when they were lined up pre-game, and Nat Fyfe was in tears, as was Alex Pearce. That was such a difficult night for the Dockers.
It was really tough, as you say. So 24 hours after their ex-teammate Cam McCarthy had passed, and a lot of those guys, there were still 11 players who played on Friday night who were teammates of Cam McCarthy. And I can tell you, his career didn't really pan out the way I think many of us thought. He was a high-end talent, but he was an extremely popular member of that playing group because he was one of those guys that every club has these guys. They walk into a room and everybody lights up because they're going to crack a couple of jokes and they're genuine. He's going to go and ask someone about, how's your kid going? Or, how's your mum? I know she's not well. That was Cam McCarthy. He was a real connector in that football club, and a lot of those guys stayed friends with him afterwards. He had his difficulties as well, which are well documented, but the impact on those players was pretty clear. I probably didn't fully comprehend it. I knew it would be an issue, but once I saw Fyfe and Pearce, once I saw how that game played out, and then driving home after calling that game and listening to Justin Longmuir talk about the impact, I was like, I don't actually think we quite comprehended how much of an impact it was going to have on that game. Whether or not they should have played the game, I heard Kate McCarthy bring that up. I know the players were asked if they wanted to play or not. They all said eventually, yes, we do. But what emotional toll that can take from an energy sapping perspective when you start running out there and the adrenaline wears off. They were slightly off on Friday night. How much of that is because of the situation? I just felt for them. And hats off to Justin Longmuir. The way he spoke after that game was sensational from a leadership perspective. It would have been very, very difficult.
It's a tough situation. I mean, like you said, Jack, you can't really fathom or try and put it into perspective to be able to play 24 hours later. And I mean, I read somewhere, and not to bring it out even further, that Nat Fyfe and Sonny Walters have had 4 teammates pass away during their career.
That's right, yeah.
Just young men in their lives and teammates that they've had do that. So for those two to be able to try and play again for just another one of their friends who has passed away at such a young age is, unbelievable.
I dare say, Zaka, that wouldn't have happened since the war era. Like, we're looking at something that's unprecedented from that, and there needs to be some more work done in the space, I think, of looking after people once they're finished with footy as well. So that's a bigger conversation. Yep. But I will say, from a game perspective on Friday night, if you look at all the numbers, the inside 50s, the stoppages, all the stats tell you that it was a pretty even game. The difference was that Sydney finished. They finished everything. Yeah. They were classy around goal, and Fremantle missed a lot of easy shots. So if you're 5% off, as we know in this game, it can be the difference.
It was 10-1 to 110 at
one
stage.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean,
bizarre.
They were well and true in the game, but they just kept not taking their opportunities.
What about the Hawks? Can we start to see now what they're building? And it's funny how things change. Only a fortnight ago, Sam Mitchell was in the gun big time, and the Hawks were under pressure. They beat the Western Bulldogs, and then they go to their home away from home on Saturday and beat St Kilda. in pretty impressive fashion, it's got to be said. Now can we start to see what it could look like for the brown and gold?
Yeah, I mean, all you need is little green shoots, right? And you're seeing them now. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Will Day's back in that team. And he hasn't been setting the world on fire in his return, but he's just so important to what they do. I think he's probably going to be their best player for the next 5 to 10 years, unless someone else jumps through the mark there. But I think there's enough there. Weddle's looking really, really good. And hats off to Lloyd Meek, former Dockers ruckman. He played an absolute blinder on the weekend. He's been good for 2 weeks. So great to see, because he's a great fella and he works hard and he's been a career backup, but he's getting his shot now and he's taking it.
I'm happy for the Hawks. I'm a big Sam Mitchell fan. I think he's a really good coach, and he looks from the outside a really good players coach, where he's hard on his players, but then he also puts his arm around them. And a lot of the players you hear about in the media talk about how fun he makes training every now and then. So I'm a big Sam Mitchell fan, but their test is going to be in the next 2 weeks. They got Port Adelaide over there and then backing up with Brisbane the week after. So yes, they've beaten 2 teams around their mark this season, who they'll be competing against, but the next 2 weeks are the big ones.
Just got to be competitive.
Yep.
I don't think any of us expect them to win either of those games. Just don't get blown out by 10 goals.
Don't have one of those bad quarters they've had. They've had really bad starts this year. On the weekend was great. They actually got off to a good start, but that's where they need to start the game.
So that's the really good. We go to the really bad, as we do on a Monday. Let's start with the draw, because if our WhatsApp group is anything to go by this morning, we are all in fierce agreement that the draw absolutely sucks.
Oh, you cannot tell me. And I know the traditionalists love the draw. Oh, it's a result. Blah,
What do they
blah,
love
blah.
about it?
I can't understand. These are people who eat cereal without milk, I would have thought. Like, what are you doing? It's just not how it's supposed to be. You cannot tell me that if after that Brisbane Lions-Crows game, that they had said, right, Crows, you need to pick 5 kickers. Lions, you need to kick 5 kickers. You're 40 metres out. You're directly in front. It's a penalty shootout of sorts. Or it's golden point. You've got 2 minutes on the clock, first to score. Whatever. Anything would be better than walking away. I mean, we spoke Jordan Dawson's interview post-game.
Yeah.
He clearly was flat. He clearly was annoyed about it. There's no world where that is the most interesting, most fun, most entertaining result. There's just not.
I was there on Anzac Day, and it was the most deflating experience being in that crowd. I mean, I think I even said we're walking out. I said, I wouldn't care if I heard the Collingwood song right now. I just want to hear something walking out of the ground. Yes, would have loved to have been an Essendon win, but just something of people cheering. Some sides elated and other side are devastated they lost, because we're in the entertainment industry. I want to see a side win and I want to see a side lose on that day. I don't care which way the result is, but I love sports around the world who have overtime. Obviously, you know, basketball, NFL in America, and people say, oh, American sports. Well,
golf.
Well, the NRL do extra time, and then if it's a draw after that, then it's a draw. So if the AFL want to do 2 3-minute periods or 2 5-minute periods, I just want to see a result happen. But after like maybe 10 minutes, all right, fine. If it's a draw, then that's fine.
Well, and here's another little note for Andrew Dillon. If you're listening, I know he loves the podcast.
Loves the show.
He does realise that if there's extra time, there's more advertising, there's more money. So the players would want to keep playing.
Yes.
The AFL should want to keep playing because it's great from an entertainment perspective and a financial perspective.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure most of the fans would prefer to see a result walking out of that ground. So I can't see who doesn't want this. Maybe a coach, I don't know, they're always grizzly about something. But from a general perspective, it makes no sense to not do it.
Yeah, and I know the traditionalists love the game the way it is and all that sort of stuff, but if the game stayed the way it was, we'd still have Fitzroy and University playing, and we'd never have a national competition. So
true.
Let's move into the modern era.
Yes.
The Tigers, really, really poor on Saturday night, Zaka. Yes, they are down on men at the moment with injuries. They have copped the worst possible run this year. Tough first year for Adam Uze, but effort, pressure, all of the non-negotiables that pretty much any player on a list can do, they weren't there Saturday night.
I don't know how they beat Sydney, to be honest. I still don't know how that happened. It's only one loss Sydney have had, but it'd be hard watching as a Richmond fan right now. I mean, yes, the last few years you've been a very successful club, but now it's a long way from that, and it doesn't seem like they're going to be anywhere near it. The recruits they've brought in, they just haven't really topped up their list well that they can still be competing for a final spot. And like you said, they have had a lot of injuries, but it's more the effort and the energy. See, I was listening to this on the radio driving back from Sale on the weekend, and even the commentators were just so flat with the performance. They weren't getting anything out of out of Richmond. The players just looked like they turned it up on the weekend and just didn't want to play that last quarter. And it's disappointing as a fan. You just want to see the effort and intensity out there. New coach, should be a new era of the footy club. So hopefully they can blood some young kids that can come in and give them that spark. But right now you just can't see it.
I would say, having seen what happened with West Coast over here, that really slow, painful decline, and then suddenly they're at the very bottom and they're winning, 2 games a year for a couple of years, and there's a long way to go still. The lessons that they need to learn from West Coast, having come off a really successful era, is don't spend too long living in the past.
Yep.
And I will say this, I reckon the footy gods are telling them that. With all these injuries, they're saying, guys, play the kids. Play Tyler Sonsi in a big role. Play Tom Brown in a big role. Play McAuliffe this week. Just get these kids out there, get reps into them, because that's what West Coast didn't do. They didn't play any kids. They didn't have any picks coming through. They traded picks. They tried to stay relevant for longer. Richmond have to listen to the footy gods here. Lean into it. Just start getting the kids in the door, getting more draft picks. If you have to send some veterans off to other teams like Hawthorn style, do whatever you need to do, but they cannot just stay in the past.
And then even with Dustin Martin, Rhino,
he's
a legend of this footy club and he will forever go down as one of their greats, maybe their greatest of all time.
There'll be a statue. There will be.
But we're doing the dance again with Dustin Martin. Is he going to play next year? What's he doing? Is there interest from other clubs? So your point there on the West Coast scenario and the learnings is a really interesting one, because to me, it's either, Dusty, are you playing next year or not? And if you are, great. Or if you want to go and explore, but we're clearly going in a different direction now. And we're not going to wait.
I agree with that one. That's he's the one that, yes, superstar, Norm Smith medalist. He's won him a couple of flags, but are you really going to help us in the next couple of years win games of footy? Or is there a kid that can come through that we can blood and get 30 games into in the next couple of years? And
is that money better spent elsewhere?
And is that money, yes, exactly right. And even for me, yes, he's a superstar of the competition, but Tom Lynch is a full forward. He's had a lot of injuries for him. Is he going to get his body right over the next couple of years, or is he going to play a total of 10, 15 games over the next 2 or 3 years for him? That's probably not going to help him as well, because his body is failing him. So they've got a few decisions with a couple of players, I reckon. I think they'll keep him, but I just think they've got a few questions on their list. And I agree with you, Rhino, on West Coast. They held their players way too long, and Richmond cannot fall into that category.
GWS, Rhino, any concerns? They've gone 1-3 in their last 4 games, and all of a sudden they've gone from looking like the best team in the competition to just an average team in the last month.
Yeah, I saw a crazy stat yesterday, which I should have triple checked. You guys might know. Is it true that they haven't played at their stadium, that Giant Stadium, since like round 1 or round 2?
Correct.
Is that right? Because they've been in Canberra.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's nuts to me.
They've had goats on their ground for the last 6 weeks.
There you go. Exactly. And we're not talking about Dustin Martin still.
No,
so
the actual goats.
Actual physical goats. Look, I think that you got to give them a little bit of leeway for that, because there's not too many teams that will go away from their home ground for that long, and they are very good at Giant Stadium. But I guess there are some concerns, and I think it tells us every time that all these teams that we think are unbeatable, all these teams that we think will, run through the season without any issues, a couple of injuries pop up, a couple of different players have to come into different roles, and you just see a slight regression, and that's all it takes. So it's not alarming. They have played some good teams in that run as well, where they're losing games there. I mean, it's Carlton, it's Sydney, and Essendon, who are running really hot right now. So I'm not alarmed. I'm alert. Let's put it that way. And hopefully now they're back on their deck, and the wild stock that have left. It's a chance to regroup.
The wild stock have left. You're actually not joking. That's true. There were wild stock on the ground. A couple of questions to pose from the weekend as well. One for both of you. Let's start with Jamarra Hagan. It's knocked back a deal, and it's been reported that he's left about 1.2 mil over 4 years on the table, that Hawthorn were really strong, Richmond were really strong. He's staying at the Dogs. It is a short-term extension. It's not a 6-7 year extension that's going to take him well past free agency and well past Tasmania. What do we think about this?
He's a very, very smart man signing a 2-year deal. It takes him into free agency, and obviously the deals will come then. Huge deals, potentially Tasmania offering him, I reckon, upwards of $2 million a year, potentially. So he's clearly had some good advice given to him about accept this 2-year deal, stay at the Doggies for a little bit, and then see what happens in the next couple of years for him, because he's one for other clubs that will come chasing.
You've got 2 options when you're a player like Jamarra, who is going to be a star of this competition if he's not already. You can bet on yourself, which is what he's done here, which is 2 years, short deal, wait till free agency, wait for the Tassie money to start circling around and go, all right, well, I'll back myself in. Or, and this is typically not what happens with the superstars. It's typically the next level under. And they go, right, I'll take a 6 or 7 year deal. I just want security. I just want to stay. We saw Andy McGrath do that, 6 years. I want this put to bed, and I'm going to stay here for the rest of my career. So I love it when players go, no, screw it. 2 years, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to play my butt off, and I'm going to increase my value. So hats off to him for doing that. It's a slight risk. There's always an injury risk, but I think it's the right call, and I love to see it.
While we're on the Dogs, they beat Richmond on Saturday night. So for all of Richmond's troubles that we've just spoken about, does that take the heat off Luke Beveridge for a minute? Yes or no?
Yes. Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I see what you guys do over there. You got 10 clubs. There's always one that's under the pump. There's always one where the journos are hanging out.
Because the media's been so kind to Justin Longmuir in the last couple of years, Rhino.
Well, I'm a big fan of Longy, so I'll sit that one out. But I think, look, it happens in every state. I think there's always a club that's under the pump, and it's always the one. It's the old, you don't have to outrun the tiger. You just have to outrun the bloke next to you. And that's the case for Bevo. So now they've won a couple. He's out of the danger zone, and now people start going, hey, what's happening at St Kilda? Things aren't good there. Hey, what's happening at Richmond? And the heat's off the Dogs just for now.
It is a little bit, but I still think our number one question with the Doggies is always, can they back it up? They beat St Kilda early in the year by 60 points, go over to Freo and lose the game over there and don't look like they were in it. So for me, it's always, can they become a consistent side? The last couple of years, they've hung around that 8th to 10th because during the year, they win one, lose one, win two, lose two. It's not about the performances of singular they put out on the park, which was the weekend. They smash a team they should. It's what can they do this week and back it up and get 2 or 3 wins on the board.
GWS, Sydney, Collingwood, their next 3, Rhino. So for those who are saying that the pressure's off him altogether and all that sort of stuff, come back to us after the next 3 weeks, I think.
And then Brisbane, and then Fremantle, who they just lost to. So it is they would need to come out of that probably 3-2 to be back on track, and that's a really tough ask.
We're going to knock off all the injury news on the other side of this. You're listening to Monday's edition of Footy Talk. Of course, if you've got a question for us, you can hit us up on Instagram at FootyTalk_pod or on TikTok as well at FootyTalkPod. Great to have you with us for Footy Talk on a Monday. Ryan Daniels, David Zaharakis, who's just got such a spring in his step for this Monday, and Jack Heverin. We've covered off the Bombers already. He wants to talk more about the Bombers, Zaka. I told him that we have to move on, Ryan.
I've never seen a chair swivel so much in a podcast. There's swagger on the man, and as he should be.
I've made sure I sat across the other side from him today, just in case. Jeremy Cameron, an interesting injury story from the weekend, Rhino. Concussion protocols. Late in the game, it looked as if he was trying to sort of tell the doctor, bugger off, I'll be okay, and all that sort of stuff. And then reports to the club the next day that he has symptoms.
It's always murky with this one, isn't it? The day after one where they're like, oh no, he's in the protocols. And you can see it sometimes in the moment. There was one with Jake Waterman over here a couple of weeks ago. It was the same sort of situation. I hope that everyone's doing the right thing. And I can understand that these players, they want to be out there, particularly when it's close. And if you're Jeremy Cameron, you're thinking, I can win this. I need to be out here. If we're going to win this game, I need to be out here. So it would be very, very difficult for him in the moment to just go, I can't. So that's why it really does come down to the doctors. But my understanding is the doctor went out and said, are you okay? Talked him through it a little bit. Cameron reassured him he's fine. They made the call and he stays out there. So we have to trust the player. We have to trust the doctor. I just really hope that that's the case.
I think on that regard, as a player, 99% of the time, you're always going to say, I'm okay. Even if you feel slightly off, competitive in the game. The game was in the last quarter. He wants to be out there to try and win it for him. I think the responsibility needs to get taken away from the player there. I mean, I know you said, Ryan, the doc, and he did. He looked like he went out there and said, are you okay? I don't think that question needs to be asked anymore. It shouldn't be asked anymore. I think it's if your head hits the ground, which
you got to go.
It clearly did. You got to come off. And I know I heard Damien Barrett talk yesterday about the potential for the AFL to bring in independent rather than the club doctors to try and take that away from having a club factor, just having an independent medical person on the side. Yep, head knock, you're coming straight off because they've got no emotional attachment to a club. But obviously the financial resources behind that's probably huge for the AFL. So I think in the future, I'd love to see that because I just think with that club coming in and the doctor coming out asking you, are you okay? There is still that emotional attachment to, no, I want to play. And the doctor, yep, oh, no worries. And then they come off. So it's a massive thing when you see a head hit the ground.
Feel free to not answer this if you don't want to, but have you ever, when you played across your career, were you ever loose with your symptoms in terms of maybe not telling the truth with how you felt?
No, so it took me back to a time my last year, 2021, we're playing Perth. I was playing West Coast over in Perth. And I remember I kicked the footy and I think it was maybe Tom Barras absolutely smacked me from the side, kicked it and hit the ground. And I remember I hit the ground and came up. And as I came up, it was ringing in my ears, but no one really saw it because I just bounced straight back up.
Yep.
But it took me 3 or 4 seconds to gauge the stadium around me that I was kind of back to, even though I never went out of it. I never did anything like that. But that immediately, looking back now, I'm like, well, I was dazed. I had ringing in my ears, and it took me 3 or 4 seconds. Even though I was back standing up, I actually don't remember hitting the ground and standing back up, if that makes sense, for that 2 seconds. So even in that moment, if the footy club or the independent doctor saw that I got crunched, hit my head on the ground and got back up, like they're like, nah, you have to actually come off and do a little test. I'd be all for that nowadays.
I think that's the way we're heading. It's whether it's this year or next year, or they'll have to redirect some funds from somewhere, Rhino. But this seems to be one of, if not the biggest priorities in Australian rules football right now.
Yeah.
So they're going to need to find that money.
They do, and it's the one that no one really wants to talk about because it's not fun. Like, it's not fun to talk about concussion. It's not fun to think about the long-term impacts. Everyone just wants footy to get on with it and play footy, and it's be rough and it's be tough. But the long-term health has to be the priority. I understand they do have a spotter in the arc, but all that spotter does is go, hey, that bloke, did he hit the ground there? Can we tell the club doctor to go out and ask if he's okay? So there almost needs to be more of an official situation there with that spotter to say, no, he has to come off.
Yep.
Bring that player off, and they've got to have the 20-minute test.
We talk about injuries. Collingwood's injury list is just starting to become quite a concerning one for Craig McRae. You can add Harvey Harrison to that list yesterday, who was subbed out with an ankle injury, and then Jeremy Howe just a few seconds later taken out of the game with a groin strain as well. They've got Adelaide on the weekend, but he's now at a point. Jack Bytel also got injured in that game yesterday. Craig McRae's now at a point where he's going to have to start to really look to the back end of their list for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and it's a lot of it's from the forward line too, which is really difficult, and then DeGoey as well, who's a scoreboard impacting player. So whether or not they can kick big scores, they could. I mean, playing West Coast yesterday, they kind of were lucky that that's who they were coming up against without Yeo, without Waterman. But the alarms are starting to ring just as they're running into form. So it'll be interesting to see how much this momentum and form can carry them through this little injury period. Because as far as I understand, none of the injuries are really significant. The goey's a bit up in the air, but the other ones should all be back relatively soon.
It's kind of funny watching that game yesterday. I was watching and thinking that this is just a completely different Collingwood side out there with players who played a lot of time in the VFL, been on this for a few years, and the names you're hearing out there was just not what you think when you picture Collingwood. But it just went back. As I was sitting watching it going, Brisbane have copped a lot of injuries this year, ACLs. Collingwood have copped a lot. It is hard to sustain the top 4 or top 6 spot in the AFL if you do lose 4 or 5 players, 6 players throughout the year.
Yep. And
we say it every year and every team goes through it, but a few teams who are at the top do have a couple of excuses, I think, throughout the year when they can't really perform at their best because injuries do happen. And as much as you try and have that next man up mentality, when you have pure talent out of your side, it is very hard to play good footy.
Let me throw one at both of you to finish off. At the moment, it's Sydney on top of the ladder from Geelong. Are they the best 2 teams in it right now?
I'd definitely put Sydney in there. And I know I don't want to run cold on Geelong just because they've lost 2 games. But I've looked at their draw before these last 2 games, and they were playing some really, lower on the ladder teams, lower talent teams, and I think they were just really professional and they were getting the job done. I still think it's the 2 Sydney teams. I know the Giants have been slightly off for the last 3 or 4 weeks, but as I said, they need to get home and play. That's my belief, with Geelong sort of being the next team there.
I agree with Sydney. Clear number 1 team. Then that next top 7 from 2 to 8 is anyone can beat anyone on any given day. And that's what's so excited about the competition right now. I'm still a big advocate for Melbourne's system.
Okay.
I think Melbourne either they lose close games or they beat teams they should be, but they're always in with a chance in every single game they play.
Yep.
So for the most consistent and trustworthy team to be in a game, I think Melbourne for me is just that team that's going to be thereabouts. But I can't split Geelong, Essendon, JB West, Port, Carlton and Collingwood right now. I think those teams are so even across the board.
Next couple of weeks will be interesting. They all start to play each other, a few of these teams in the top 8 as well. So we'll get a very, very clear idea of things. Rhino, great to see you. Thank you for being with us this morning.
No, my pleasure, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Zaka, nice work by you. Your day can't get any worse, can it?
Cannot get any worse. And the next 3 weeks probably either.
Thanks for being with us on Footy Talk, of course. If you are listening on Spotify, then hit the bell. You'll be notified when we drop a new episode each and every day. And you know how we roll on Footy Talk on a Tuesday. Tomorrow, Joey and Rui are back. We'll catch you then.